Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be on the culture war that's happening in the US. Now, this is not something that's just recent. Despite what people might be saying, this has been a war that's been waged for a long time. Um, One of the conspiracy theories that was pushed on the through right-wing media was about the Frankfurt School and about cultural Marxism. Now, whether or not you believe in this conspiracy, uh, there is some kind of truth to it. I mean, there's always some truth with any story, you know. Um, and I kind of want to explain the story so that you can understand what are the origins and what are the goals of this cultural revolution. So, way back when, the Frankfurt School was a socialist communist school. Basically, they saw that that there should be a social revolution leading to communism. And they thought that this would happen, but it didn't. So what they expected would happen is in the First World War, instead of going off to war to fight in some cause that nobody really understood, I mean, the reasons for the First World War were pretty vague. Like really, it was like connections between the different countries. It was like, there was no real reason to go to war, but they did. Okay, so they thought that the people within those societies, especially these workers who have been oppressed by the capitalist machine, would want to rebel, would say, hey, we're not going to go to war for some cause that we don't believe in. But the exact opposite happened. Because the soldiers were very nationalistic and they believed in their country and they wanted to protect their country and they stood by their country's goals. So what happened was uh, the Frankfurt School basically was set up to prepare people for the what needed to happen in order to basically bring on the socialist revolution. Because they thought, well, okay, obviously the people are not ready mentally. They're just not. They're not there yet. So how do we get them there? Well, what is causing the problem? Why are they not converting to socialism? And the reason that they basically figured out was that people were too nationalistic. They had too much strong bonds within their communities. They had too strong bonds within their families. And so what you do if you want to bring on this cultural revolution is you got to disconnect the people from themselves. So what you have to do is make them not nationalistic, destroy the idea of nation. And what you also have to do is destroy the sense of community. And what you also have to do is destroy the sense of family. So those three levels: nation, community, family. And how do you do that? Well, first, you demonize the nation. So what they would do is they would the concept was this, that the nation, and it was nationalism that led to Nazism. That was one of the theories that they always keep on pushing. If you see a lot of the people on the left, they'll push this concept that the nation and this nationalist movement was what led to the rise of Hitler. And it's a very common misbelief. Actually, it was nationalism that fought against the Nazis, because people were like, well, I don't want some country like Germany deciding the whole world's fate. Like, if you think about it, the Nazis were not nationalistic in their approach. They were basically trying to take over the world. And it was the nations who wanted their own sovereignty that fought against it. So really what it was a lie that they were trying to tell. They were saying, oh, it's like, oh, this German nationalism that led to the Second World War. But, that's just not true. But, it's a good lie. If you repeat it enough, it becomes true. And that's the way the Frankfurt School thought, and these cultural Marxists. Now, the reason it's called the Frankfurt School it was university professors, I think in Princeton. You can comment below if I'm mistaken in that, but I believe it was Princeton or some of the Ivy League schools where these professors, these socialist professors, basically became embedded into the university. And ever since, actually, there's been a real shift within the universities to this more left-leaning socialist kind of professor. And I actually studied at university in the sciences. So my field really didn't have much of this cultural influence. But I actually took a few electives like sociology and psychology, and I could see the real impact on those studies. This is going back 30 years almost now. Oh, I'm getting old. Okay, so yeah, so what I noticed was that they had reinterpreted history through a lens of socialist kind of ideology, that everything that it was either the patriarchy or capitalism or something, nationalism, that were the blame, the reasons for the failures of our society. Um, and that was the goal was, how do so the first thing is you demonize the nation. And the next thing is you break apart the community. Well, how do you break apart a community? Um, one of the easiest ways is through multiculturalism. Multiculturalism, if you can't relate to your neighbors, if you don't have a sort of same kind of lineage, well, it makes it very hard to communicate. Like, and I live in Toronto, so I've seen how multiculturalism has really broken down what used to be tight-knit communities. Now you have like very ghettoized communities where you'll have like white groups in one area, you'll have Asian groups in another area, you'll have like different factions within the city. And what that leads to is there's no real sense of community between these different ghettos. And that just breaks apart the community. There's no common bond that links everybody together. Again, this is step 2, weaken that community. And you'll see a lot of these socialists kind of push this idea of open borders and diversity. Another thing that socialists like is the concept that everyone is equal and all people are the same, that they're very pro-egalitarian, which it sounds like a good thing. But what they'll do is they'll say that, well, all people are the same, all cultures are the same, and we're basically all interchangeable. And that way, you break apart this community and you also devalue the people within that community so that people have no bond with each other. And actually, the funny thing is I saw this especially recently, not with the riots that are happening now and the protests, but actually with the COVID-19 pandemic. And what I saw was there were basically these people who, the government was propagandizing us every day, like literally every day, saying, oh, you have to socially distance, you have to cover your mouth, you have to wash your hands. Some good messages, obviously if there's a disease, you want to do those things. But they were going further than that. They were basically encouraging people within our society to basically tell on each other. Oh, I see that person not socially distancing. I'm going to tell the police. And what that does is when you have this kind of, snitch society where people are, reporting to the government instead of just, talking to their neighbor and saying, hey, look, maybe you should, avoid contact with each other or something like that, or finding out why they're not following the guidelines. And maybe they have a good reason not to follow the guidelines. And why should we have these guidelines when all of a sudden, it's okay the virus seems to not have any issue with protests, but it seems to have issues with political campaigns when they're on the right side of the political spectrum. It's kind of convenient, very convenient virus, actually. Just weird how that works. So what happens is when you can't trust your neighbors, like I was going to have a play date for my kids. And my wife was like so against it because she was so afraid that our neighbors might tell the police or might tell like the government in some way that, that we're not socially distancing. And as a result, we ended up not doing the very simple play date. It was people we knew. It would have been fun for my kids. My kids are kind of trapped inside a lot, so this would have been kind of a fun experience for them. But my wife was just too afraid because she couldn't trust her neighbors. Um, One of the things that I've seen way back when was the movie In the Killing Fields, and it is really a sort of in-depth look at how communism and socialist societies kind of run. That they really do like the idea of people policing themselves, and that if you fear your neighbor enough, you will keep the rule that the government sets. And it's really a means of getting that government control. That people are too scared to do something that might go against the government. They don't trust their neighbors. They don't trust anyone, and there's that fear within that society that that they won't be able to do something that might go against the government. And I see that happening. That really happened a lot during the whole COVID-19 thing, and I really saw it as a precursor to what's happening now. Um, so what's happened is, as I said, these university professors are basically indoctrinating our children to create this next wave of people who are going to be indoctrinated and say, oh, we got to protect all these things. We have to fight capitalism. And, they're breeding socialists, basically. And what's happened is that you get this kind of cultural Marxist group who's infiltrated pretty much every major facet of our society. They're controlling the media. They're controlling the governments. They're controlling the educational system. It was first at university level, but now it's going further and further down, where you see even young children being indoctrinated into very socialist ideas. And the idea is to really prepare, as I said, the Cultural Revolution, which is to break down our society in every way. And you'll see this actually even with the whole concept one further, which is the breakdown of the family. You'll see the push for feminism. And one of the things that people don't understand, and the reason I'm very against the whole feminist movement, is I see it as a socialistic movement. That it's not about helping women. If it was about helping women, I'd be all for it. I'd be like, yeah, help women, because I love women, maybe too much. So yeah, my wife, yeah. So it's like one of those things where I'd be for helping women. I think, I believe in helping all the people in our society. And, but that's not what it's about. That's not what feminism is about. Feminism is actually very anti-family. It's, they promote the idea that single motherhood is a good thing. They promote the idea that women don't need a man. And that's very, like, if you see, that's one of the strongest messages within the feminist movement is women don't need men. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Like, it's one of the things that we have to understand is we need each other. Men need women, women need men. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually how our society works. And that's what makes strong family bonds. But if you look at it, as the rise of feminism has gone up and how the rise of this social movement has gone up, the welfare state and all these kind of things, where governments have gotten stronger and bigger, what ends up happening is the family unit has become weaker. So if a woman can get pregnant and doesn't need to have a man to support her, then she can rely on the government. The government will give her like welfare or some subsidies, or will provide daycare for the child, provide all the things that normally like a relationship would be required to, provide. then the woman doesn't need that relationship anymore. She can just have a child, and it's fine, just have a child. Also, the man, like, to give some responsibility to men were like, well, okay, I don't have to take care of this child anymore. I can just wander off and have sex randomly with random women, and it doesn't matter because I know that the government will take care of those women. And that takes responsibility out of the men's side. So what's happened is we got this sort of critical loss of responsibility where we're things have been encouraged where we rely more on the government than ourselves, that we have shrugged off all sense of responsibility, and that's really what's kind of happening here. What I see with all these riots and stuff is kind of just like the culmination of all this kind of stupidity, where you have these people, the media is kind of focused on breaking down the society. It's saying that, what are the big things that kind of keep society kind of running? Well, law and order is kind of an important thing, and respect for each other. And one of the things that's being promoted is the concept of racism. And I really don't like racism. And I mean that in a weird way. I don't mean that I don't like the concept of racism. I don't like the usage of racism is what I mean. Because I find that what's happening now is racism is sort of like a new god. And it's actually been a tool. Racism as a concept was really invented by socialist groups. It was used as a means of control within Russia, just so you know. It's one of these things that is being used by the left to control people. And so what you do is you tell people that instead of thinking about what was the cause. So let's look. I hate to always bring up George Floyd, but it's a perfect case because it's one of those ones where pretty much everybody, left and right, universally condemned, and wrongly so. So, if you look at if you even watch the video, you can actually see that the whole narrative doesn't make any sense. Why are we assuming that there's racism involved? Is it just because it's a white guy on a black guy? If that's the case, then we could never have white cops dealing with black people. So we'd have to, that seems awfully racist to me, that we'd have to have that difference, that we can't that we can't have like the two groups working together. It seems very racist to me, but hey, maybe I'm crazy or something. That's the first thing, that they look at the race of the cop, and they look at the race of the criminal. He was a criminal. And they basically say, well, because it's a white guy on a black guy, therefore that means it's racism. And that's the assumption that's always made. And the media loves that. They love these kind of racist situations, or what they can call racist. It's always racist if it's a black victim and white perpetrator. That's the whole idea. Even though statistically speaking, that is really rare. That's like really, really rare. But it's a great narrative that the media loves to promote. The media loves to promote things that are the rare case, because if it's normal, if it's something like black people killing white people or black people committing crime, well, that's not interesting because that happens kind of too often. Look at the stats. It's pretty scary how much black crime there is, and how much, if you look at white versus black in terms of the interaction, it's 90% of the crimes, racially orientated crimes, are blacks against whites. So it's 10% is whites on blacks, but then 90% is black perpetrator against a white victim. So it's pretty insane, and yet we focus on the small section, which is a police officer rightly arresting somebody and maybe something going wrong. And that's somehow, and that's there's 10 million arrests that happen in the US, and we focus on the 10 that go wrong in some way, that might not have the outcome that we like, um, where somebody dies. In the case of George Floyd, think about it. Like, the video is about 10 minutes long. Obviously, at about 10 minutes, you see the paramedics come. Well, paramedics don't teleport. They don't instantly appear. They take time, probably take 10, 15 minutes to get there. So that would imply that those paramedics probably were called before George Floyd even went to the ground. The cops were actually doing what they could to protect George Floyd's life. There was actually a thing where if you put the person on their stomach, like George Floyd was, that's actually done in order to mitigate any potential risk that he might be from the drugs or from the shock of the situation. So that's actually a technique that's in the handbook that they do to mitigate any potential or to reduce the chance of fatal injuries or something going wrong. But in the case of George Floyd, according to the autopsy, he had like 3 times the lethal dose of drugs in his body, and therefore that's probably what killed him. Plus, he had a heart condition. But even actually, I'd love to do a video if I could convince my wife, because I'm a 3rd-degree black belt in judo. If you see all the trophies behind me, those are all like judo trophies for the most part. I actually tried the technique where I did it the way the cop did. What you do is you put the weight on the back and you put your other knee to brace the neck. You don't, like, when I say brace, I don't mean actually there's no pressure, 0 pressure on the neck. It's just on the back. I tried it actually on my wife, and which is, she actually was kind of keen to try it, strangely enough. I tried it on my wife, and she said there was no pressure on her neck. There was nothing. And if you watch the video, you can actually see George Floyd's head going up and down, which means that there was no pressure actually on the neck. So it wasn't that the cop had his knee on George Floyd's neck. It was actually just like something that was blocking his head from moving up further than it was already. So basically, the whole narrative of knee to the neck is false. The autopsy shows that as well, that there was no blood choke and there was no air choke, and there was no damage to the neck. So it implies that that really the weight was probably on the back, and that the cop was probably innocent, despite like the way the video might look. Sorry for the tangent, but I kind of feel like that needs to be explained more over and over again until somebody hears. But the whole narrative, and this is back to the cultural Marxism, is that you have, what do you want to do? You want to break down the society. So what you want to do is break down the trust within that society. So first, you want to break down the trust between the different racial groups. And this is why racism is such a powerful tool for the left. What you do is you say, well, that group is racist, and that group is trying to oppress you. That group is the one that's causing your grief. And then what happens is there's conflict, okay? And nobody trusts each other, and then they have to trust the state to sort of intervene. So that's the goal, is to shift the trust from each other and working as a community and push that trust to the government. And that's what we see happening. And one of the things is we also see the shift where people are losing a sense of personal responsibility, that people are they're being encouraged to take extreme actions. So before even all the facts of the case came out, the politicians themselves were promoting the idea that this was a racist attack, this was a murder, and that something must be done. And you people have every right to riot and protest and burn the cities down, kill people, and do your mayhem. So it's sort of like encouraged by the government to basically, and that's when you can see that there's an agenda here. That if it that it's not a spontaneous thing. It's something which is being fueled by the media and by the government. That they're really trying to encourage this division. They're trying to encourage that the different groups are kind of not working together. Um, so I'm trying to show you how cultural Marxism, even if it's just a conspiracy, but the idea of this socialist movement is really what's driving a lot of this. And the reasons for it is if you can break down the society, then you can pick up the pieces and basically control that society under like some major strong government control. And the things that I see to go further than this, and actually the parallels to Nazi Germany are pretty insane. If you think about Nazi Germany, Nazi Germany was a socialist society. It was actually uh, its goal was to, the Nazis were national socialists. So they were a nationalist group in some ways. They were pro-German, but their real focus was on socialism. That they wanted the government to control every facet of German life. And they basically did that. But how do you get to power as a socialist group? Well, you find somebody to blame. And the Nazis liked the Jews. The Jews were really easy to blame. They had all the money. They were, these rich bankers for the most part. They were fairly well-to-do. And at the time, Germany was kind of poor. It was not very well off. And so what you can do is you can demonize that one group that seems to be doing well and say, well, they're doing well because because they're oppressing you and they're making you do poorly. Very easy kind of thing to do because people already have like some animosity to a group that's more successful. Like if somebody's more successful than you feel like, oh, maybe a little bit of jealousy. So what'll happen is like you say, okay, blacks in America, oh, you guys are so oppressed. The average white guy, he makes 10 times what you do. Now, they don't actually look at the real numbers, but it's a good story. It sounds good. It's probably not that extreme. And they don't look at the choices that people make. So if you look at what white people do compared to black people, well, generally, white people promote more education. They are less criminal. They don't have they have a lower rate of crime, and that generally encourages better outcomes. Especially the motherhood rate, the single motherhood rate, and within the black community is another thing that kind of kills their ability to actually make lots of money. So if you remove all those things, probably the disparity between blacks and whites is not that extreme. And there's other groups that do way better than the whites, the Asian groups, and there's even foreign blacks that do, immigrant blacks that do better than white Americans. So, so the whole narrative is false, but it sounds cool. It sounds like, oh, those evil white people. It's the scapegoat. You just blame the white people, and then you can say, okay, they're the ones. So it's the same as what the Nazis did. So they picked the Jews. Now the socialists of today choose white people. And they're a nice one to demonize because white people are generally very non-racist. It's actually kind of strange how non-racist we are. We should be a little bit more pro ourselves. I don't know. But white people generally are not very racist. So what ends up happening is if you tell them, oh, you guys are so evil, you're naturally racist, and you sort of demoralize them because you say, well, I don't feel like I'm racist, but then everyone's telling me that I'm racist and everything I'm doing is bad. So what happens is you see all these white people feeling demoralized. They feel like nothing they can do is right. And everything that they do is oppressing other people. So they feel really bad about it. And they don't want to oppress anybody. They just want to live their lives. But they're being constantly told that they're oppressing people. So they don't know how to respond. And it demoralizes them. So that's the perfect scapegoat, that you can basically demoralize this one group and get everyone to hate that group. And the media just continuously fuels that. you know, it's kind of crazy how it happens, but it works. It's very effective. And what what we have now is these black people basically are the kind of useful idiots. And I don't mean that they're idiots. Like I'm not trying to look down on their IQs or anything like that. But what I'm saying is they're useful idiots because of the fact that what you want to have is whenever you want to have a social revolution is you need to have a fight. You need to have some kind of violence. If you look at Marxist theory, it's always that the worker class is going to actually kill the the capitalist class, that they are going to actually rise up and kill them. Okay, so they want that physical, violent revolution. So what they do is they need people to be those useful idiots that achieve their goal. That they don't have to understand what that goal is. They just have to be the ones that burn things down. They have to be the ones that attack. They have to be the ones that carry out the acts of violence that these you know Marxists won't do themselves. They don't like to carry out acts of violence themselves. They like to get others to do it. So those are the useful idiots in my story. So what happens is these black people they're being energized by the lies that the media tell them, that this narrative that the evil white people are oppressing them. They might never experience racism in their whole lives, but yet they're being told that they're constantly being oppressed. And it's one of those things, like if you want, like there was actually a really cool experiment. I'll explain this experiment and it will make, hopefully this thing will make sense, where they basically had a group of people coming into an interview. And before they went into the interview, they had sort of these fake people, but not fake people, they're real people, but they were sitting in with them waiting to be interviewed. Okay. And what they did is they would basically say, oh, that interviewer, he's really racist. So you just got to be really careful. And, they would sort of prime these people being interviewed to have an opinion about the interviewer. Now, the interviewer was not racist. It was just a neutral person. And all they were told was that they had to interview people. They didn't have a racist thing or biased in any way. They were just interviewing people. But what happened was they would poll the people afterwards and say, okay, how was your experience with this interviewer? And when they were told that the interviewer was racist and that was biased against them, they recognized that bias. They had this sense of bias. Now, what they did is they kind of ran the experiment multiple times where they would tell people different things. So sometimes they would tell them that the interviewer was racist. Sometimes they would tell them that the interviewer was just a really nice guy and would be totally unbiased. And then they basically, and it's like the person didn't change. It was the people who were being interviewed whose perceptions were changed. And when they were told that the person was racist, they saw them as racist. When they told them that when they went in with the perception that they were unbiased, they saw them as unbiased and very open, and they saw them as good people. So it's almost like if you tell people to look for racism all the time, they'll see it. And as I said, racism is this tool that you can use to divide people and control people. Because if you can break down those connections where people don't trust their neighbors, there's no sense of community, and each of the different groups are all at war with each other, then it's perfect to control, because then you can say, well, you obviously can't trust each other, so trust in us, the government, to take care of you. And if you notice where the problems are, if you notice all these cases that we hear about, all these situations where there's a cop shooting or all these different stories, they all happen in left-wing areas. It's not that the people that are primarily conservative or like in white neighborhoods are the ones that are committing these acts. It's actually the opposite. It's generally these left-leaning cities that have these issues. Um, but those left-leaning cities are the ones that where there's the most control. Like I just saw a recent video where there was, right now they're trying to tear down all the statues. So this is another part of the Marxist goal, which is to just destroy the history, make people forget the whole history. Well, in the video that I watched, there was like a group of people and they were trying to tear down a statue. Okay. And somebody came over and was like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. That's, illegal. And they basically attacked the person. So the person like kind of walked off and was being, they were attacking him. And he pulled out a gun to say, hey, look, don't mess with me. I got a gun. And they kept on attacking him. So he shot. And one person got injured, severely injured, actually. And what happened was some militia came and protected this man because he was still being attacked. There was people actually came at him with a knife, and they were like hitting him like repeatedly. So he basically had to defend himself because it was pretty scary. But what happened? The media instantly said that this guy was some evil racist white person, and that they arrested him, and they arrested the militia that tried to protect him, and it sort of they promoted the narrative that these protesters were peaceful, and they promoted the idea that these evil white supremacists were trying to cause problems, and it's a total lie. And that has serious consequences. Like all this stuff that I'm talking about has serious consequences because these people are getting killed. They're people getting killed from all these things. When George Floyd died, that was a tragedy. Like, I feel bad for the guy, but it's his own fault for taking too much drugs. But that isn't the tragedy of George Floyd. The real tragedy of George Floyd is the fact that in the protests, more than 10 people got killed. And that to me, and those were all innocent people that didn't need to get killed. And businesses were destroyed. And that's the tragedy. Like hundreds of businesses were burned down. That's and there was a lot of these black owned businesses that were destroyed. So to me, that just further causes problems. And so the point of all this is that we have this whole false narrative that's being woven by the media, by the politicians, that is with an intent. And the intent is to break down our society and push a communist revolution, a socialist revolution. So I hope that this gives you some insight into the cultural war that we're experiencing right now and the motivations behind it. I'm more interested in the motivations behind it. Why would the media promote this? Well, if you believe that socialism is the best way, then you would want to promote this because it's achieving the goals of socialism. The thing is, even the people that promote it probably don't understand it. It's not that they actually understand socialism or anything like that. They probably have been brainwashed into thinking that what they're doing is the right thing. They believe that Black people are being oppressed. They believe the lies that they're spreading. And even when the narrative doesn't fit, where, if you look at the circumstances, it just doesn't fit, they will ignore it. They'll ignore everything because they have that preconception where they just won't want to change what they believe. So it is what it is. Like you have these different layers of people all working together to bring on the socialist revolution. And if we don't do something and either call it out for the lies that it is, or say, hey, look, governments, we're not going to vote for you if you're socialist. We got to fight socialism. And and reach out to our neighbors and on a friendly basis again, and start trusting each other rather than trusting our governments. Then we're basically welcoming this social revolution. And I don't want to see that, because socialism sucks. I don't want to eat rats. I don't want I don't want to be killed just because I'm a capitalist. So yeah, socialism is a total failure, and I wouldn't want to see our society go that way. So hopefully this cultural war will end with a capitalist victory. I don't have I don't have high hopes, but I'm hoping more people will wake up and listen to the messages that I'm trying to put out. And yeah, please share this video, share my other videos. I put out a lot of content, and I really want people to start thinking about stuff. That's all my goal is just to get people thinking. It seems like people have shifted that responsibility of having their own thoughts onto the media or to the government, where they don't even think for themselves anymore. I just want people to think for themselves. And, if you don't agree with me, I don't care. I don't care if you don't agree with me. Just tell me why you don't agree with me, and let's hash it out, but at least think for yourself. So yeah, this has been Socially Triggered. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.